Here to have the first man and start the service. Here, have seats, please. They started the service.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services here this morning, we would kindly ask if everyone would please turn off or silence all electronic devices. Thank you.
Whatever your understanding of Adonai, or God, may be, as a source of holiness, a connection to loved ones, a sense that you are a part of something greater than yourself, may it be a source of help and of comfort. Over these past weeks, the love Gail inspired through her deep commitment and involvement in our congregation fueled endless verses from Psalms and prayers from the heart. Even in her illness and even in her death, Malka elevates the holiness in our lives. Today we assemble in loving memory of Gail Meister. Our hearts go out to Greg, Miriam, Meryl and Ellen, Susan, and many friends and family who cherished her. May each of you find comfort in the love of those who surround you now. Loss and sadness are not alien to our Jewish tradition. In such a time of grief, as Gail's steadfast faith inspires us, the voice of the psalmist calls out to us. From Psalm 16. Shaviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My whole being is secure. For you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful ones see destruction. You shall show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring wholeness is your gift. We join together with the voice of the psalmist in the 23rd Psalm. together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
The wisdom literature from our Bible, from our Tanakh, also offers us words by which to view our own lives. In Ecclesiastes, we read that in the course of life and death, there are moments for every type of behavior. We read, for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. In this moment, as we remember the life of Gail Meister, it truly is a time to speak. It's my honor to first welcome up her daughter Miriam.
Those of you here today know my mother in varying ways, to varying extents. Some of you may know her in a limited way, maybe just through my father, as a very beautiful woman who faithfully accompanies him. This faithfulness grows a dimension when one considers that she is an observant Jewish woman, faithfully supporting her husband, a Christian minister, at events where he preaches from a doctrine different than her own. So perhaps you know Gail Meister as a unique and beautiful note of harmony. Others of you may know her as a neighbor. Perhaps you volunteered with her at the town paper. Or perhaps you encountered her biking, a sourdough baguette sticking out of her basket, on a commute she used to take to see the herons. Or you might have met her walking several miles every morning at dawn, en route to look for eagles. Or you might have met her shoveling after a snowfall. She would be out in her boots in the white world, shoveling her very long driveway. This was the one piece of outdoor yard work that she claimed as her task because it was a joy. She liked to shovel snow. Maybe this is the woman you know. Some of you may know her professionally, in her professional world of education, and therefore you would know her creative brilliance, encyclopedic knowledge, rigorous work ethic, powerful insight, and perfect reliability. The more you shared this sphere with her, the more you would know how she worked to build palaces of learning, constructing stairways and passages, stationing sentries, so that the populace, particularly the disadvantaged, can get through to claim the glory and the power of an education. Others of you may know her because you met her as a political citizen. Maybe you attended one of the gatherings she hosted for a local political candidate. Or you attended a planning meeting focused on how to achieve social justice. Maybe you marched with her, holding signs in the street, chanting, "Justice, justice, justice." Many of you know her through her reaching kindness. When she reached out to you as a stranger, she noticed you and introduced herself. She invited you to her table for Thanksgiving. Or perhaps she wrote to you a note to congratulate you on a triumph. Or she tried to honor and comfort you when she came to visit you because she discovered you were sick or grieving. Some of you may know her well enough to share with her a love for literature. I recall how she would laugh and laugh through a book by Mark Twain. Perhaps you were in a book club and probed together the deep world of a new story. Or maybe you knew her when she attended a play with you. She certainly did many times with me. At age 4, she took me to an outdoor performance of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream that I recall was so much fun. In our trips to New York City, we never focused on any fancy restaurant or city vista. Instead, she would find us a play to see. I learned from her how to learn from a play. It demands our empathy in the story of another. Suddenly, intimately, unavoidably, before you on a stage. The characters of the world are worth our attention. She and I were in plays and community theater together every year of my childhood, starting at age 6. When we were in the musical The King and I was a Siamese princess, and she was a queen. We both kowtowed for hours in rehearsal, wore our gold-embroidered costumes, and sang the rhyming verses to express our characters' hearts. Which brings me to poetry. Very few of you may have had opportunity to know her through her love of poetry. I knew her this way. We would read poetry together, and she would point out where she took pleasure. She would encourage me to write it, and I did, and she did. We gave each other poetry as presents. Birthdays or Mother's Days or anniversaries, we churned out odes to one another. Sometimes she would ask me to recite a poem I know. As she lay dying, I had volumes ready to relay. What I find most exciting about my mother was her curiosity. I know her as motivated by curiosity in a powerful way I have never observed in anyone else. Because of her curiosity, she always stopped in the street to read even the most tarnished plaques. Because of her curiosity, she took me all over the world. And I hung on her coattails across 5 continents. She led me to synagogue services in South Africa and Peru. Because of this curiosity, she would be fascinated in museums infinitely, inspecting for hours the way people used to live. And it was so exciting to be with her when she would exclaim in an intense whisper, bursting with amazement about something old behind museum glass. She consumed the world and its history and its sights voraciously. This I maybe loved the most about knowing her. Now, how will I, close with a poem by Merritt Malloy that I found in a prayer book. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking in the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
Amen. Thank you, Miriam, for those beautiful words. And I think so many of us see so much of your mom in you. We next welcome Gail's husband, the Reverend J.W. Gregg Meister.
The book of Ecclesiastes says that a threefold cord is difficult to sever. And when it is severed, when our threefold cord is severed, it is gratifying to be with you and those who are on live streaming, supporting us. And on behalf of Gail and my remarkable daughter, I just want to say thank you. Listen to this prayer from the psalmist. May the words which will cross my lips, and the meditations which will cross each one of our hearts, the tears which will flow from our eyes, be found true and worthy and acceptable in God's sight. Our Lord and our Redeemer. After 31 chapters and 915 verses, the concluding paragraph in the book of Proverbs, which for literary reasons is attributed to King Solomon, reads, "A good wife, the wife of noble character, who can find?" Solomon had 1,000 wives. When he died, he was still looking for a righteous queen. I am more fortunate than King Solomon. By the grace of God, I found my good wife, my righteous queen, on my first try. And for my Christian friends, Malka is the Hebrew name that Gail's parents gave her, which means queen. God, for reasons that always escaped Gail and me and our relatives, could never quite figure out why God gave me, Malka, my queen, my good wife. It began as a blind date. The springtime of our lives, my senior year at Williams College, her senior year at Mount Holyoke. It was the 1960s. It It was at a bar. It was sex at first sight. I just want to know how many of you were in college in the 1960s. We are a dwindling cohort, but you know what I'm talking about. God's presence was not in evidence that night. I was not a practicing Christian, and Gail was not a practicing Jew. Actually, we didn't discuss religion. I can't tell you what we did talk about, because I can only recall that she was whispering French poetry in my ear. I don't speak French. She was fluent because she lived in Paris for her year abroad. With my Midwestern Indiana twang, she thought I was from the South. And that didn't seem like the best time to correct her. We did not race off and get married. People and places intervened as we went our separate ways, connecting again when we were both in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then in 1971, she with her master's degree from Yale in French, and the day before I graduated from Princeton Seminary, we married. We put behind us, with full disclosure to each other, but not to anyone else, our wayward ways. And we committed ourselves to each other and only to each other. Full disclosure could be translated theologically as repentance and forgiveness. Gail, however, trained me to avoid religious terminology whenever ordinary language would suffice. We knew that a Long Island Jew and a Presbyterian minister from Indiana brought significant differences to the party. But with a youthful confidence, we began a journey that ended, much to our stunned surprise, at 5:02 last Thursday afternoon. A blind date in a secular setting ended with a devout Christian holding the hand of a devout Jew as our daughter prayed in Hebrew the prayer for the dead. In between the bookends of a blind date and a deathbed, Gail and I embraced each day with its opportunities for living, learning, and serving as fully as we could. Psalm 16 has been our go-to scripture. The lines have fallen for us in pleasant places. As a biblical real estate image, the surveyor would throw out ropes, lines, to determine a person's property boundaries. As a metaphor, those lines demarcate the years that God gives you. For half a century, in sickness and in health, joys, sorrows, victories, and defeats, my wife and I navigated the decades together. Gail said to me 10 days ago, just before the hospice became within our boundary lines, no apologies, no looking back. We made it work. Malka, my good wife, made it work. Proverbs again. The noble wife does her husband good, not harm. Because of the righteous wife, the husband is known in the gates. At age 30, to our surprise, since we were only a few years removed from our long-haired hippie days, I was installed as the senior pastor of a 600-member church in San Francisco. If my gate was to be a pulpit, Gail was determined that her husband would grow whatever abilities he had to stand at that gate. And that's when I discovered her editing skill. We had 2 worship services every Sunday morning with an hour in between. I would preach the same sermon twice. Gail attended both services every Sunday for 11 years. After the first service, she would whisper in my ear, in English, how I might change a word or tighten a paragraph. Back then, I was preaching from a manuscript I had written and memorized, and I did not bring notes or outlines into the pulpit. I did not always appreciate her editing suggestions just before the curtain is raised. What I learned is that I had married an exceptionally sharp-minded wife who would not settle for a cliche or slogan or trite phrase. A recent example, a few days ago. "Don't say I passed," she told me to share with Rabbi Eli. "I'm not going to pass. I'm going to die." Gail loved to edit, because she loved language, precise language. She spoke precisely. Gail did not speak with incomplete sentences. I claimed that I caught her once with a grammatical error. I think the year was 1998. She was never convinced, and besides, she didn't think I would be the best witness anyway. Gail worked as an executive for Rhonda Lauer at Foundations for 20 years. Raise your hand, Rhonda, so we know where you are. There you go. I'm confident that Gail had deleted extraneous adjectives and changed the passive voice to the active for multiple sentences for every grant and every charter school application that would then cross Rhonda's desk for final approval. Bob Vogel, who would be with us, but he's in Florida, another person whose mind she greatly respected, for whom she was a consultant these past several years for his Writers Matters organization, can also attest to her editing skills. Writers Matters helps kids who are Muslim, Jewish, and Catholic learn how to live together. Interfaith communications actually being something of Gail's specialty. Ellen, where's Ellen? Ellen and the Days of Learning Committee, the RS office staff, can speak to her attention to details, to her charm for leading a meeting, keeping everyone on schedule while giving each person an opportunity to express an opinion. As her proud husband, I can see that people enjoyed being around her. In part, this is attributed to her remarkable memory. If Gail met you and you introduced yourself, she knew your name. On a cruise, we'd have lunch with 2 strangers. And several days later, on a ship or ashore, she would greet them by name. I had forgotten their name by dessert. At our church in San Francisco, she would stand in the narthex of the sanctuary and greet every visitor, and then introduce that visitor to a nearby church member so the visitor could understand how our service went. It helped, by the way, that our services in English. And we didn't skip a lot of pages. Gail often remarked that her church experience prepared her to perform a similar function at Rodef Shalom, and it was heartening to hear Rabbi Jill mention this trait of Gail's during her remarks about Gail Friday night. Gail had an extraordinary capacity for travel. We decided in our first year of marriage not to wait until retirement to travel. By our 30th anniversary, we had driven in 20 different countries. During our 50th year, with international travel not possible, we explored new places in the United States, driving 9,703 miles in 2021, and stopping at more historical markers than most people think exist. I drove the car, but we were driven by Gail's remarkable curiosity, insatiable curiosity. Early on, we began holding hands on every takeoff and every landing. And when we came in for our landing in Philadelphia this past December 20th, 2 days after hearing in an emergency room in San Diego that Gail likely had advanced ovarian cancer, I held her frail hand and I reached across the aisle to hold Mary's. And I sensed that we were coming in for our last landing. And yes, it was. But as Gail would insist, as she did through her hospital stay, until she lost consciousness in the hospice, the lines have fallen for us in pleasant places. Some of those places were rocky. Proverbs. The Queen of Sheba left King Solomon to return to her own country. My Queen Malka left me to return to her own heritage. But my good wife took me with her as she returned to the God of Abraham and Sarah. On your RS website, you have a 10-minute video where Gail describes how she moved from a Jew to a Christian minister's wife and back to her Jewish roots. I hope you watch it. What she doesn't say on the video, but what she did say to me, is that while her father's death was her eureka moment, my preaching paved the path, benefited from her editing skills. My sermons insisted that each listener decide, with fear and trembling, his or her true beliefs and relationship to God. I'm proud of the fact that as the husband of a noble woman, from my gate at the pulpit, I could be part of her return. Gail would not recommend listening to 500 Christian sermons twice as a preferred route to Judaism. But it worked for her. She would, however, encourage every Jew to return to your ancient heritage. As someone said in her Torah study, you are getting close to your final exam and you are unprepared. Gail's return and my joining her was not easy when her spiritual eruption occurred 40 years ago. It has never become easy. And here's one way that we made it work. Thankfulness defines a faithful Jew, and thankfulness describes the life of Jesus. What shall I render unto the Lord for all his bounty to us? Says the psalmist. I will offer thanksgiving, is the answer. Therefore, every year, for nearly 50 years, Gail and I would hold hands and say what we were thankful for. Bad days, ordinary days, hospital days. Whether it was just the two of us at home or with friends at a restaurant. That's what we did. We'd invite others to hold hands with us and say something they were thankful for. Some did, some didn't. Solomon describes the noble wife as one clothed strength and dignity, whose daughter will rise up and call her blessed, as Miriam so beautifully did this morning. People would often comment to Gail on her clothes and how attractive she looked, an attribute I had picked up on rather early. She did wear designer clothes, but she got them from Goodwill. In Proverbs, the only color Solomon uses to describe the clothing of the wife who eluded him is purple. Purple, in the Bible, is the color of royalty. Solomon is describing more than the good wife he never found. He is describing the queen he never found. I did. I found my mother, my queen. These last few months, Gail moved us into the habit of reciting the Jewish song for the day. Thousands of years ago, Jews selected 7 psalms and assigned each one of those 7 psalms to each day of the week. You who are Jews may have already read the psalm assigned to today, Sunday. But for those of you who have not, it's Psalm 24. I will read it for Gail and to her merit. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in that holy place? The person who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up her soul to what is false, does not swear deceitfully. This is the person who will receive blessing from the Lord and vindication from the God of our salvation, because she is of the generation of those who seek the Lord and of those who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. And who is the King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty. The Lord, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. And who is the Queen of glory? My Malka, my wife, my best friend, she is the Queen of glory. Selah, Selah, Selah.
Amen. Amen.
thank you, Greg, for those beautiful words. I know about the love that the two of you shared of Psalms, and had the joy of getting to discuss them and study them with you, Greg, as well, and your wonderful book on them. And encourage everyone to look at that as well. I'm not going to say that Malka was a beloved congregant because she didn't want those trite sort of comments. She was an amazing congregant. She was an amazing person. She was family. She was a friend. She was so important to each and every one of us and had a unique relationship with each and every one of us. Greg alluded to this amazing video on our website from that Days of Learning where people talked about their Jewish journeys. The wonderful Scott Engel did such a nice job moderating it, and Scott even shared with me about what a wonderful process it was just to work with her on that. And anyone who's ever worked with her on anything knows how organized she is. She lays everything out for you, sets you up for success. In that beautiful video, she talks a lot about her life, being born a baby boomer right after World War II and growing up in Long Island in a very Jewish context. She shared that her schools were closed on the Jewish holidays not because of some beautiful act of equality by the school district, but more because there wouldn't have been any students or teachers at the school, because so many of them were Jewish. She grew up at Central Synagogue, not the one in Manhattan, but of Nassau County, a classic Reformed Jewish education going from consecration to confirmation, and sang in the youth choir. She then met the love of her life, Greg, and converted to Christianity when she married Greg. As he said, she was the perfect minister's wife. She would promote the church, welcoming folks, and truly much of what she learned during that time as a minister's wife led her to be such an amazing congregant and leader in our congregation. It was also through that time in Christianity that she learned about personal prayer, and it was through church visits to Israel and arguing with parishioners in Bible study that helped bring her back to Judaism. The return was a process, not an event, but struggling for quite some time. It was, of course, at her father's Shiva when she felt something change. And it was that moment, reciting Jewish prayers, that she felt fully comfortable in those prayers and knew what she had to do. Traveling back to San Francisco on that 6-hour flight, she cried for much of the time, not knowing what this would mean for her life and her marriage. She saw herself alone, but still connected with God, and said that the inauthenticity would have killed her. She was bruised, but Greg was ready to stand with her. What next, she asked, and a voice came to her, perhaps that still small voice, that kol damama daka that Elijah the prophet speaks of. That voice called to her and said, "Keep listening." And in that moment, she called out, just like Moses in Exodus 33, to say, "Do not abandon me, God. Do not leave us on this journey, but come with me." And I believe God was there with her in that journey. As they moved back east, she joined a more traditional congregation, would go there on Friday nights, and then on Saturday mornings would go shul shopping, as they say. It was during one of those shul shopping trips that she arrived at Rodef Shalom's Torah study, and how lucky we all were. That's when I first met Malka at Torah study, and it was right around the same time that I had come to the congregation about 12 years ago, and I was still figuring out who was a member or not. And I genuinely didn't know if she was a member, and I remember asking her, not trying to put me pressure or anything like that. She's still totally invited to be with us. And she said, "I'm not." And I said, "We'd really love it if you wanted to be." And I guess it was just that simple invitation was all it took. And I'm so glad that she took us up on that invitation, because her membership at our congregation, her friendship, her leadership, her compassion, her care, has profoundly affected me and so many in our lives. So I was thinking about trying to describe Malka in some small way, to honor and to eulogize her. there was a text that came to my mind from our rabbinic literature, the book of Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Ancestors. It's a book written around the 1st century by the rabbis, and Pirkei Avot 4:1 begins with a rabbi, Rabbi Ben Zoma, who talks about 4 qualities that truly make up a mensch. A mensch, for those that know, is the German means just, a person, but the Yiddish it's a little bit indescribable, but it's Malka. Ben Zoma asks, Ezehu Hacham, who is wise? Halomed Mikol Adam, she who learns from every person. As it is said, quoting Psalm 119, for all who taught me, I have gained understanding. Malka was so wise. She studied at Mount Holyoke for undergrad and got her master's from Yale and a PhD from Stanford. She taught middle school and then moved on to education consulting. Education was central to her life. In her work, in her volunteer time, in her free time, she wanted to learn. She wanted to teach. She wanted others to learn. Many of us saw this most from our time with her at Torah study on Saturday mornings, where we learned from her and she learned from us. She listened truly and responded. She would lift up other people's comments and sought to expand upon them. She had insightful commentary that truly cut to the heart of every issue. In her times of days of learning with Ellen and others, her amazing organizational skills, her evaluations, her structures for presenters, the diversity of lessons and the relevance of it brought so much knowledge to our congregation. But also little things, like she helped Elaine and Steve with readers and helped us to organize an online database of Jewish books and recommendations for other congregants. Again, she just wanted to disseminate that love, that knowledge. Greg spoke a little bit about her work with Writers Matter and our congregant Bob Vogel, and I'll say I was especially honored because she immediately thought of me during those programs and invited me to come attend a session at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where she was helping to implement a program where students from Barak Hebrew Academy and students from Al-Aqsa Mosque School studied and learned together. Who is wise? She who learns from every person. For as it is said in the Psalms, for all who have taught me, I have gained understanding. She learned from everyone and sought to learn from everyone. Ezehu Gibor, Ben Zoma continues, who is mighty? Gail was very physically fit, loved to bike and hike and spend time outdoors, but Ben Zoma, of course, is not talking about that physical strength. Ezehu Gibor, who is strong? Hakovesh et Yitzro, she who subdues her evil inclination. For as it is said, to quote Proverbs, to quote King Solomon, she that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and she that rules her spirit better than she that takes a city. Malka, as my mother said when I told her the sad news, who really grew to appreciate her from their few interactions at Torah study and other places, said she was really classy, sophisticated, and I would agree. She never raised her voice or said a negative word, and whenever she offered feedback, it was in such a thoughtful, caring way. Even in moments of disagreement, she lifted up the Jewish value of machlochet l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven. They weren't arguments where she would get angry. They were ways to make us all celebrate and observe Judaism in a more thoughtful way. One example that I was thinking about recently was one of the first emails I ever received from her, almost 12 years ago. And she wrote about how there was a certain music, I guess, that was playing, some piano that was playing under the Kaddish list when it was time for people to speak names of those that they were remembering. And she said, I think it may be off-putting to some people and not allowing them to truly connect to God, to their tradition in that moment. But the way she wrote it to us, in this thoughtful, caring way, so as not to embarrass, and not in an angry way, not upset about it, but seeking to create a machlochet l'shem shamayim, discussion, a debate for the sake of heaven. I remember Rabbi Mader's response when she said, "What a thoughtful email." I think you could say that about every single email or comment she ever made. What a thoughtful comment. Ezehu mechubad, Ben Zoma continues, who is honored? She who honors her fellow human being. For as it is said, to quote the book of Samuel, for I honor those that honor me. I came across another video recently on Facebook of Malka promoting one of our Days of Learning sessions, and there was just one brief comment under the video. It was from a congregant who wrote, "Gail is such a kind and generous woman. I miss her and all our friends at Torah study. Shalom." What that one friend from Torah study posted speaks volumes about what all of us felt. Gail had a special relationship with so many, even if she only met them a few times. She saw in each and every person that they are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And she saw that divine spark, that divinity, in every person and treated them that way, whether greeting someone new to the congregation or running a program. I remember a few years ago, obviously before COVID, when we would look to find homes for Passover Seders, for congregants that didn't have anywhere to go. And I'm looking to Catherine Fisher, because we would always scramble and say, well, who's going to just accept some random new convert to Judaism or some random person into their house and welcome them for a Passover Seder? And we knew exactly who we would call. It was Malka, because in a minute, of course she would say yes. She honored everyone in that way. She also honored our whole world in her commitment to justice. She worked with us in Power, Philadelphians organized to witness, empower, and rebuild, multi-faith community organizing effort, and especially in our education work with Power. She also was heavily involved in our anti-racism work for all of those same reasons. And so many of you have shared photos and stories of being with her at rallies, whether for women's rights or LGBTQ justice, because this was her. Ezehu mechubad, who is honored? She that honors everyone else. Lastly, Ben Zoma asks, Ezehu ashir, who is rich, who is wealthy? Hasameach bechelko, she who rejoices in her lot. For as it is said, to quote Psalm 128, you shall enjoy the fruits of your labors, you shall be happy, and you shall prosper. Ben Zoma continues, you shall be happy, he says, in this world, and you shall prosper means in the world to come. Malka was one of the richest people I know because she was truly happy with her lot. She was taken from us far too soon, and there was still so much left for her to do in this world. And as difficult as the last month was, I know that she was ready, and she truly was satisfied with her life. During this pandemic, she got to spend more time with her family, with that threefold cord, with Miriam and Greg on the West Coast, spending time outdoors or walking. One of my favorite images that will always be in my head was early morning Torah study when she would log on from the West Coast and you could see behind her the beautiful sunrise and the nature, and you could just see how happy she was. Just maybe a coffee or a tea in hand and studying Torah. It was as simple as that. Ben Zoma says, Ezehu ashir, who is rich? She who rejoices in her lot. For as it is said by the psalmist, you shall enjoy the fruits of your labor, you shall be happy, and you shall prosper. Of course, it feels appropriate to close with the words of the psalmist. As many have said, psalms were important to Malka. Many of you recited them over the past few weeks to pray for her healing and comfort. I remember back a few years ago, Malka actually taught a whole class of psalms to our Philadelphia Center City Kehillah on our Shavuot night of study. She loved Torah, Judaism, and God, and sharing that love with so many in our entire community. The psalmist says, "You shall be happy in this world." I know Malka was happy. It was all of you that brought her so much joy, contentment, and peace. And the psalmist ends, "You shall prosper in the world to come." I don't know what happens when we die, but I know that Gail's memory will be a blessing to all of us. She will prosper every time we read Psalms, every time we engage in Torah, every time we welcome a new face to our congregation, every time we invite someone into our homes, every time we fight for justice, and every time we offer a loving hand or word to someone in need. Gail Malka Meister's memory will truly be a blessing to us all. Please rise. May the memory of Gail Meister endure among us as a blessing. In your own time, O God, when we too are called to eternity, may we lead this life secure in the faith that in your light we shall see light. In life and death we cannot go where you are not, and where you are, hope endures. Sustained by this assurance, we invoke your name, Almighty God. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Torim, Kezohar Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmat Malka Bat Yehuda Lev Ve'elisheva Shel Halcha Le'olama Ba'al Harachamim Yastireha Beseter Kenafaf Le'olamim Yitzror Bitzror HaChayim Et Nishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata V'tanuach b'shalom al mishkavaha v'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Gail Meister, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. Please be seated.
May we have the pallbearers, please. We would ask you all to rise once more, please.
Esa Einai el Harim Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Esa Einai el Harim Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Me'im Adonai Ose Shamayim Va'aretz Ezri Me'im Adonai Ose Shamayim Va'aretz Esa Me'ayin, me'ayin yavo Ezri, Ezri, me'im Adonai, Oseh shamayim va'aretz, Ezri, me'im Adonai, Oseh shamayim